Good morning. Welcome to this Friday edition of Ask Pastor Tim. Today's question is about biblical translations and specifically about why the King James Bible became the popular Bible, or for some people, the Bible to use in the English language. The King James Version was commissioned in 1604 by King James, and the translation was completed in 1611. It came to be called the Authorized Edition or Authorized Version because the king authorized it. It wasn't specifically authorized as the book that all churches should use for the Bible, the translation that all churches should use, but it became the authorized version for the Anglican Church as commissioned by King James. Over the course of time, it became a very popular translation because of its beautiful poetic language, and for its day, it was an accurate translation based on the manuscripts in Greek and Aramaic and Hebrew, but also Latin that they had. But in the intervening years, people began to think other things about the King James version of the Bible. Some people came to think it was the only English translation, forgetting the history that there were a number of translations, quite a few translations of the Bible in English before the King James Version was commissioned. And also then people started to attach theological significance to the King James Bible, as if treating the King James Bible as if it was the inspired Bible itself. And yet we recognize that the original texts of the Bible were in Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, and they were translated into other languages. For a lot of years, the only Bible that was used by the church was the Latin Vulgate, and it was used in the Roman Catholic Church, which was the church for a number of years for Western Christianity. And there was actually an opposition to translating the Latin into English or other languages, in part because it was easier for the ministers, the priests. If the pastor was the only person who could read the Bible, then nobody could argue with the pastor about what the Bible said. But Protestant Christians believed that all people, lay people, clergy, everyone should have the Bible in their own hands, and so there was a history of translation. The reason that we generally don't use the King James Version very much anymore is twofold. One is, since the translation of the King James Version, we have discovered a lot more Greek and Hebrew manuscripts that are older and more accurate than the Textus Receptus and the other manuscripts that were used to create the King James Version. The other thing is that the English language changes. And so what made really good sense in English in 1611 doesn't make nearly as much sense in 2020. So a lot of people have a hard time understanding the Bible in the King James style of writing. Some of our high school students even today no longer read Shakespeare or don't read much from that period, and so it's almost incomprehensible. When I was younger, pastoring in another denomination than the United Methodist Church, it was actually kind of in vogue to preach out of the King James Bible, and I found over the years that I had to share the scriptures, then I had to explain the King James before I could then preach. And so it was almost like I was having to translate for people. For United Methodists, for a lot of years, the most popular version of the Bible has been the New Revised Standard Version, which is in the family of the King James Version, in that there was a Revised Version and a Revised Standard Version and a New Revised Standard Version that came in. But as we've used the New Revised Standard Version over the years, one of the things we've recognized is that the language of the NRSV is a pretty high-level English. It's really written at about the 11th or 12th grade reading level, and it's not all that accessible. Also, again, it's been a number of years now since the New Revised Standard Version was translated. So United Methodists and several other denominations got together and have now commissioned a new translation called the Common English Bible, which I'm beginning to use in worship. I was so used to the New Revised Standard Version that it's been hard at times for me to use the CEB because I trip over the wording. But many times it is clearer in the Common English Bible. Besides biblical translations, you ought to know also there's study Bibles, and there are Bibles that are commissioned by different denominations to share their own viewpoints. Along with the New Revised Standard Version, probably one of the most popular translations is the New International Version of the Bible, and it was commissioned by a group of evangelical scholars. It reads, it's a pretty easy read. It's a good translation. It does have a tendency, however, in the translation to do some things with the role of women that's questionable in the translation. There are places, for example, where the word deacon, diakonia is the Greek word, it's translated deacon when it's next to a man's name, and then they translate it as servant, the other meaning of diakonia, when it's next to a woman's name, and there's no grammatical reason for doing that. It's just based on the theological viewpoint of the translators. I have one of the Bibles I have. It's called the Wesley Study Bible. This is obviously we're Wesleyan Christians. We follow the teachings that began with John Wesley and his followers. So the Wesley Study Bible is a United Methodist publication, study Bible. It's the New Revised Standard Version, this one, and yet it has study notes on different topics from a Methodist Wesleyan perspective. It's a very good study Bible. You'll run across other translations for from other denominational backgrounds. This rather heavy, weighty tome is the New Jerusalem Bible. It's a Roman Catholic translation. It's a good translation for reading. It reads well, it reads nicely. The study notes are from a Roman Catholic perspective in theology. So, for example, there's a spot in there where I discovered that the person who wrote the study notes was arguing that clearly the scriptures says that ministers, priests should not get married. Well, that's clear to our Roman Catholic friends, but it's not clear to our Protestant friends who are all of us who are Protestants, non-Roman Catholic Christians who believe that clergy can marry. An interesting way to read different translations is to consider getting something like a parallel Bible. This is a parallel Bible that has 4 translations in it: the King James Version, the New International Version, the Living Bible, and the New Revised. And what it does is it sets up the book in 4 columns. See if you can see that. And you can read side by side what the different translations are saying. Now, I'll warn you, great for study, but not the best for, say, reading in a dark room. The print's very small. You might decide you want a magnifying glass if you use one. There are also separate publications for our Jewish siblings that are what Christians often call the Old Testament, but really should be more correctly referred to as the Hebrew Scriptures. And the one that's published by the Jewish Bible Society is the Standard Jewish Bible for the English-speaking world. It's called the Tanakh. The Tanakh. That's what Christians often call the Old Testament, and it comes from it's an acronym of words that comes from the words Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Navaim is the prophets, and Ketuvim is the writings. And so our Jewish friends divide the Hebrew Scriptures into those kinds of sections. And if you pick up a copy of this, you'll learn that the books are in a little bit different order. And that's also a good translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. One of the things, so that lets you know that when you go to purchase a Bible, if you purchase a hardback copy, and of course a lot of these Bibles now are available in different formats like ebooks, Kindle and Nook and other kinds of readers, but you should know something about the translation. If it's a study Bible, you should know what perspective it's written from. Doesn't mean you can't pick up a study Bible from another perspective other than your own theological perspective, but you should know what the perspective is. And that's something important in biblical translating and understanding. Now you may ask yourself, well, we got biblical translations. Are they all saying different things? No. In fact, they're all quite close to each other. What you're getting is nuances in meaning. The Greek language is a very rich language, and many times a word can have multiple meanings that are translated into a word that we use in English to mean all kinds of things too. Maybe there's multiple words in Greek for the single thing in English, or vice versa. So for example, we often have talked in the church about the word agape, which is a word for love, the word eros, which is a word for love, and the word philios, which is a word for love. In English, we say, I love God, I love my wife, and I love ice cream, and we mean three different things. Obviously, how we love God and how we love our spouse and how we love our dog are different forms of love. Greek divides those into three words. Agape, which is the godly, self-giving love. Eros is romantic love. And then philios is a brotherly or a friendship kind of love. And there are other ways to describe that too. So translators have to try to pick the English word that seems to get the best meaning. And so scholars get together and do their best to do that. The English language continues to change. There are all kinds of words that exist now that didn't even exist when I started ministry. I didn't say 30 years ago, hey, let me go Google that. But I Google things all the time, and everybody knows what I mean when I say it. Some of the things we say about computers, some of the things we say about technology, some of the ways we describe life, and some of the ways medical terms and terminology around human sexuality has changed drastically over many years, and the way we understand the way the world works has changed because of science and knowledge we gain. And so sometimes we have to translate it in such a way that you get the meaning of the original across, because once something changes, once our language changes, you have to keep speaking the language that the people are speaking. Who knows what an English translation will look like in 100 years, 200 years? So at this point you might be asking, what's the best translation of the Bible? Well, I can't say that there is a best translation, but I would recommend that you consider one of the more modern translations, like the Common English Bible, the New Revised Standard Version, the New International Version, because they're readable, they make sense. If you're getting a study Bible, I would have you consider getting a Bible that's in the theological background of the denomination you're in. If you're part of First United Methodist Church, if you're United Methodist, you might want to look at the Wesley Study Bible. But there are also study Bibles for prayer and devotion. If you have any questions about a study Bible or a translation, please feel free to ask me or Pastor Brian Williams, our associate pastor, and we'd be happy to give you some guidance on what their uses are for certain translations of the Bible. One of the things that I think is really valuable is for us to take time to read the Bible. And another time when we do either an Ask Pastor Tim or one of my other vlogs, I'll also talk about Bible apps, because there's all kinds of great Bible apps out there that you can use to download multiple translations, multiple study Bibles, and even multiple commentaries about the Bible. Well, and of course, one of the most important things to say about the Bible is whatever translation you're using, whatever study Bible you're using, it doesn't do you any good at all if you don't use it. If it sits on the shelf collecting dust, it's not much use. So I encourage you to take the Bible and read it and study it and pray about it, discuss it with others, have conversation around it, because the Scripture says that we study the Bible to show ourselves approved as good workers, rightly dividing the word of truth. God bless you. Have a good day. Have a good weekend.